and welcome back to our podcast. And thank you so much for listening. So, this is a bit of a delicate one. We come to call this one when grief becomes a burden. So, carrying grief or being carried by it. We've been circling around this for a while now, right? Discussed it back and forth. And if this could be a good topic for a podcast.
Yeah, because maybe it's a little bit of a touchy subject. We don't want to offend anyone or come across as if we're judging how someone grieves, because we're not, and that's not what this is about.
Not at all. We know from experience how personal and layered grief can be. There is no rule book, absolutely not. But at the same time, it's also fascinating or strange in a way how different we are, how some seem to find a way to move forward eventually, and others can get absolutely stuck in their sorrow for years. And then you have those who never get out of it. I mean, two people can experience the exact same thing and react completely different. That's just the way it is.
I guess that's true. And it is, as you say, fascinating how different we truly are. And why is that really? What does it all come down to? And when does grief become a burden or maybe even destructive? That's kind of what we want to explore today, with care, of course.
Yes. And again, not to judge. We're both being through our own versions of grief, and we've seen people around us handle their losses in completely different ways. And we will share a few different examples today, but let's start with the grave. Because some people go visit the grave of the one they've lost every single day. Maybe that brings them comfort, structure, even peace. And then there are others that hardly ever go. And some can get totally stuck and even move from their own home just so they can be closer to the grave. And we will come back to that. Then you have me or people like me, where the husband or the loved one doesn't have a grave, and also the fact that I actually haven't even been to my stepdad's grave yet, not because I didn't love him or I don't miss him. It's just, I don't know, I haven't felt the need, or I think it will be just too hard at this point. That doesn't mean I'm grieving wrong. It just means my grief looks a bit different, I guess.
Exactly. There is no wrongs here. And I wonder if that is a burden, though, or if it feels destructive when that patterns start to take over your life. If you feel like you have to go to the grave every day to be okay, or even move closer to the graveyard, as you said. Because maybe then it becomes a ritual that kind of blocks everything else in your life, like relationships, joy, new experiences. And does this stop you from healing? I think maybe this is when grief stops helping you heal and starts holding you back.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, I have to say regarding this, I watched the latest season of Perny recently. You know, that Norwegian show I love and really explores this.
Actually, I haven't watched it, but I heard it's really good. My friends have been watching it too. But what is it about again, and how does it relate to this specific topic?
So in the show, Perny, the main character, have lost her sister, and even years later, she still calls her sister's voicemail like several times a day. It's this quiet thread that runs through the whole series, and it's actually heartbreaking, but also just so deeply human, I think. And that's her way of staying close, you know, of keeping her sister in her everyday life. But the people around her, especially her sister's husband, who moved on now in the latest season and found someone new, he really starts questioning it. He wants her to stop and to let go. And that's where it gets complicated because, of course, we want the people we care about to keep living, to find happiness again. But at the same time, who gets to decide when someone else should stop grieving? Grief doesn't follow a schedule, and that scene just really captures that tension between holding on and letting go, and how lonely it can be when others think you're stayed in it too long. Or, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Mm, that's probably for sure a touchy subject. And I guess there's no universal clock for grief. Some people move forward quickly, and some hold on longer, and some carry their loss quietly for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And that show really captures how grief can be invisible, but still shape everything, kind of. And it's not necessarily about dwelling or getting stuck. Sometimes it's just about carrying your loss in a way that makes sense to you. And for me, that's what the show reminds me of. That grief isn't about forgetting, it's about learning to live with that missing piece. And it comfort means hearing a familiar voice or visiting a grave or talking about your person every day. That's okay. It only becomes a problem if it starts pulling you out of your life instead of helping you stay in it. And of course, in the end, Pernie manages to let go in a way and are able to open up her heart again for love and life.
That is beautiful. And I
Yeah.
think that you're right. And even though grief is deeply personal, I do think we sometimes need a little help from the people around us to gently remind us to keep living, not to erase the past, but to say, hey, life is still here, you're still here, and I'm or we're still here for you, even though maybe it could be hard.
Yeah. And I guess the same goes for how we talk about grief. I mean, grief in general and the ones we lost, because some people need to mention their person in every conversation and call their voicemail to talk to them or talk to pictures even. And some cannot hold back their tears when they talk about their loss, always or for years. And others barely say a word. And none of that is wrong. But at some point, I think it's fair to ask, am I honoring them, or am I healing, or am I stuck?
Yeah. And sometimes we keep rituals going, like keep the grave looking nice, not because it suits us, but because it feels like the right thing to do. Or we feel guilty if we don't, maybe. And I don't think that's uncommon at all. We do things for so many reasons: love, guilt, habit, sometimes all at once.
Yeah, totally. And maybe that's the question we'll explore today. Are we doing things that help us live, or are we doing them because we're afraid not to?
Let's dig into that. This is when grief becomes a burden, and maybe how we can learn to carry it in ways that feels a little lighter.
Okay, let's dive in. And first of all, I must say, I've been thinking about the whole thing with graves, the pressure some people feel to keep them tidy, decorated, looking nice all the time. And actually, that's one of the reasons why my husband wanted to be cremated and his ashes to be spread instead, because he saw the grave as kind of not a burden, but I mean, yeah, that was the word he used, but not in
Yeah.
a cold or dismissive way, but just that he didn't want us, especially me and the kids, to feel responsible for a physical place like that. He wanted us to remember him in other ways. And he'd also seen that this whole family grave thing had been a burden or a hassle over the years for some.
Yeah. Sometimes it is like that, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a little bit sad, I must admit, to go to a graveyard and then you see a grave that's nicely decorated, and then you look over and then there's one that has weeds
Only
and
weeds.
nobody ever, yeah, you can tell that nobody's visiting it. So I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But to be honest, I do sometimes miss the idea of having a grave to go to, even though I've never really found this huge comfort in visiting graves myself. But at the same time, it does, if that makes sense. Like, I know he's not there, but still, it's kind of like the last actual thing or place or symbol after a loved one. I
Yeah.
mean, it's complicated.
Yeah. I guess it is. I guess it's a place where people think that they can go and talk to the person, maybe.
Yeah.
But I can understand that this can be complicated. And I'm not even sure what I would want for myself, if I would want my
Mm,
own grave or
yeah.
So
I
many
mean,
things to think about that you don't want to think about.
yeah, that's true. But the most important thing back then, was to honor his wishes, and that was clear to me. But I'll admit that that wasn't easy for everyone around us. For some family members, it felt really strange or even wrong because it goes against tradition, also, and I get that, I really do. And also the fact that some might want the grave to go to. But again, this was his wish, so that was the most important thing. And he was very determined of this. And honestly, the whole process with cremation was so long and draining, a nightmare on its own. Because here in Norway, you actually have to apply for permission to spread the ashes, and there are a lot of restrictions. I wasn't allowed to pick up his urn before this was settled.
Yeah. Again, so many things you don't really think about until then and there.
Yeah.
And I guess you can't just do whatever you want. And I was kind of shocked to find this out, things we don't go around thinking about in our everyday life until something like this happens. Because he wanted his ashes to be spread at Holmen, right? Your special island where he loved to spend his free time.
Hmm.
But that wasn't allowed under the Norwegian law.
Definitely not. So I was in shock too. Like, I knew there was restrictions, sure, but I had no idea what I was up against back then. And it totally drained me. And to be spread at our island was not allowed, like you said, against the law, believe it or not. So it took months and months, and we didn't get to spread his ashes until April the year after. So 8 months after he died, to be exact. And during that time, we were just kind of in limbo, really. And of course, you know the story.
I do. And I understand, like, you wait 8 months for something to be resolved where you just want to kind of have a closure to, that grave, no grave, or where's his ashes going to be, or actually to fulfill his last wish, maybe.
Hmm. No, that was the most important part, of
Yeah.
course.
So it's frustrating to see everything you have to go through to grant his wish.
Hmm. Because meanwhile, also, I watched other people have, funerals with graves and had the stones and flowers. And that, of course, stirred something in me. Not jealousy, but a longing, maybe, a kind of grief inside the grief. Because a part of me wanted that too, in a way, as I said, because that was the normal thing to do. But I also knew we were doing this exactly the way he wanted it. So that mattered the most.
Definitely. I really feel that. It's like you are carrying out his wishes, but at the same time, you are carrying this emotional weight of not having that place people usually have. And even if you're not someone who finds peace at a grave, there is still this strange kind of expectation around it, right?
Hmm.
Like a part of grief is supposed to look a certain way, a headstone with a name on it, a visit, fresh flowers. But maybe grief doesn't always need a physical marker. Maybe it's okay if the connection lives somewhere else, inside you, or in memories, or in a place you just carry quietly. And yeah, the system in Norway, it is very rigid, and it makes something already heavy even heavier, especially when it takes that long.
Hmm.
So the waiting must have been exhausting, but I think you did the right thing. You respected him, and maybe that's one of the purest way to love someone after they're gone.
Yeah. And I think that's also such a good example of how complex grief is in this, also, traditions and such, because we can respect someone's wishes and still have mixed feelings about it later, like I
Yeah.
did.
Like I said, I'm not sure what I would want myself, but I do know that I would do everything like you to keep their wish. And that is important. Grave or no grave, there is no right or wrong here, just very different needs, and they can shift over time.
Yeah, that is so true. Moving a bit away from the subject here, maybe, but I think this whole process with his ashes kind of prolonged my grieving process and made it more difficult to move on in a way.
Very understandable.
But regarding this topic, there is this Norwegian phrase that says "dyrke sorgen," And literally, it means cultivating your sorrow, maybe, or worship your sorrow.
Yeah,
And, anyways,
feeding your sorrow, maybe, too.
yeah, it's like the meaning is that you're tending to it or watering it or keeping the sorrow alive in a way, and it doesn't have a positive vibe to it. I think it can sound pretty judgmental, right? Because when do you start doing that?
Yeah, definitely judgmental. I mean, come on. But it is a fact that some tend to stay stuck in their grief in a destructive way, both for themselves and those around them. We both heard of families that kind of goes under because of this. And I think this is what makes this topic feel so sensitive, because grief isn't a choice. Of course it isn't, but how we live with it does shape our lives.
Yeah, I definitely do. And I've been wondering, why do some people eventually make choices that allow them to heal or at least live better with their grief while others don't? Is it our personality, our support, timing, the trauma itself, culture, gender, our upbringing, age? I don't know. And yes, I say make choices because I think that is a choice we have to make at the end of the day. Might sound harsh, I know, but yeah, not everyone is able to make good choices for themselves. So maybe I should reframe it to why are some able to make good choices for themselves and others not?
Good and delicate question, I feel like. Probably a mix of all that, what you said there. And maybe it also depends on how we're raised to talk or not talk about emotions, our upbringing and prior experiences, maybe. Some people are taught to power through, others are encouraged to really sit in the sadness and quietness, maybe.
Yeah. But even then, I have to say, grief has no clear timeline, and yet people often expect it to have one. So I think this also is about how those around us expect it to be, and we try to live up to that also. Like some might think or say, okay, it's been a year. Aren't you doing better now? Or the opposite. Wow, you moved on already? It's only been a year. So then you have that.
No, it's true. This is a weird pressure either way. Grieve too long and people worry, grieve too little and they judge. Everyone is just trying to survive the best they can, I think.
Yeah. I guess the only thing we can do is to stay curious and compassionate and kind to ourselves and those around us. And I mean, just simply care and also dare to ask these questions, both to yourself and others when we worry or when we see that others maybe seem to be stuck in a bad or unhealthy space. And remember also, no two grief stories are ever the same.
No, but talking about it like this helps. I mean, at least for me, even to talk about the uncomfortable parts, especially those maybe. You mentioned that one of your close friends had a really tough experience with her mom after her dad passed away. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah. It's one of those stories that just stays with you. And this was also kind of my first real experience with loss and grief up close, I think, back then. And maybe this is a perfect example of how devastating and destructive sorrow and grief can be.
And you checked in with her, right? To make sure she's okay for us to share her story.
Yes, of course. I spoke to her, and she was actually really honored that we want to include her story in the podcast, especially if her story might help someone else.
Yeah.
So here we go. Her parents were pretty young in their early 40s, and my friend, she was around 20 at the time, still so young herself. And on top of that, she just had a baby, or maybe it was a year or so before this happened. So, anyways, she was navigating being a new mom and all that also when her own father died very suddenly, kind of out of the blue. He had a massive heart attack at home, so it was quite dramatic and chaotic for the whole family.
Wow, that's terrible. And also such a vulnerable time to lose a parent, really.
It was totally. And her mom completely fell apart. I mean, the grief just swallowed her from the very beginning. She even sold their house quite suddenly after and bought a new one closer to the graveyard, like literally to be near his grave, as I mentioned earlier. And at first, my friend said she understood that. She could see how it gave her mom some comfort in the beginning, but it didn't ease up. So, to make a long story short, the years went by and her mom stayed in that place, just completely frozen in her sorrow and grief.
That must have been so hard to witness. Was she open to getting help?
Well, my friend tried for years, therapy, support, conversations, doctors, everything. So she really did everything she could to help her mom out of it. But her mom just couldn't move forward. And on top of that, she started very early on relying heavily on alcohol and prescription pills.
Yeah.
And it was a way to numb the pain, I guess. And I kind of understand the need for that in the beginning, but it, of course, made everything worse. She was just stuck in her grief. And of course, there were moments of light. That is important to mention. She tried now and then, and especially with her grandkids. She was a loving grandmother, and her grandchildren really loved her. And maybe that was something that gave her some kind of strength at the time and kept her going after all for a while or in between her battle, I must say.
But not really there as a parent or mom anymore as she was before, maybe?
No, that was the thing. I guess she tried her best, but my friend had to step up and kind of become the mother of the family at 20 something while grieving her dad and taking care of her baby and all that. And she told me once, it felt like I lost both my parents that day, one to death and one to grief. And that's the part that breaks me every time. It's just devastating. I mean, she felt so helpless for years. Poor her. She really tried everything to help her mom.
Well, that is so heavy. It's not just the loss, it's the chain reaction that follows. All the roles people suddenly have to take on while grieving yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And she said something that really stuck with me from back then. She said if my dad had seen what grief did to my mom, he would be devastated. He would never wanted this for her because he was full of life and she was too. And I remember them as this loving and fun couple, always music and laughter and good energy in their house. And he would have wanted that for her still. He would have wanted her to keep living, to love her family, to be a part of the world. But sometimes grief just takes that choice away from people in a way. It was just like she couldn't go back to living, just existing, and that is heartbreaking.
Back to living, just existing. Wow. So powerful to hear it said like that, really. And so important to say that out loud because I think we sometimes assume that everyone can bounce back or that time alone is enough. But for some, the grief might be like quicksand. And if they don't get the right kind of help or if they can't open up for the support they have been given, they just stay there, maybe for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And again, no judgment. We all grieve differently. But there is a point where grief becomes something else, I think. It stops being just sadness and it starts taking over someone's life, consumes them in every way, and that affects everyone around them.
When that happens, it's not just grief anymore, is it? It's kind of like a living loss. Like the person is still here, but they're not really here.
Hmm.
So I can totally see that she felt like she lost both her parents that day.
Yeah, and I think this story is a perfect example of when grief becomes a burden, right? When it takes away not just one life, but many.
So she never made it out of the grief then, or her grief.
No, she lived almost 20 years in that space. Poor her. And in many ways, it's like she died long before her body did. She just existed in her sorrow most of the time, and it shaped their whole family. It left marks that never fully healed. So I think this affects us around deeply, and it must be so hard to witness.
It must be. And that's such a heavy burden for your friend and her family to carry all those years.
It really is. And I'll never forget when she came to my husband's funeral, my friend. She was in complete shock to see me upright, literally. She told me she had prepared herself to find me in bed not functioning. She packed clothes and planned to stay and take over, just like she had to do with her mom. She couldn't believe I was standing and talking and laughing even now and then. I mean, she was expecting to kind of meet her mom, I guess.
That says so much about how shaped we are by our experiences. Her own grief blueprint was just devastation.
It truly was. And I totally get that because that was her truth. And her story really made me reflect over this. Grief can become so destructive, not just sad, but really consuming. And now I was in the same situation as her mother, and I just couldn't let that happen to me. Of course, in the very beginning, you are in that place, but not over time. You just have to find your way out.
Yeah.
So maybe moving a bit away from the exact topic now again, but I think maybe these stories kind of show some aspects of how difficult it can be sometimes to try to move on and keep living after a loss. Because I had this really interesting conversation with another friend the other day, kind of casual research, really. Um, we were talking about love after loss and moving on and so on, and how some really stay stuck in their grief, also, the time limits, and of course, personal experiences, widow police, and such.
No, that's always interesting. Tell me.
So, well, we talked about this and that and shared our stories and others. And then she told me about this woman who lost her husband and then actually found love again just weeks after. Can you imagine?
Weeks? Wow. Wow. That probably stirred some reactions.
Yeah, tell me your first responding thoughts.
I guess I just gave it to you by saying there must have been reactions. I mean, in my head, I would think that I would never find love again if my husband passed away, like ever. So it's hard for me to imagine. Maybe it seems soon, but when can you really say how you will respond until you're in that situation yourself? And we are also different. Love comes when it comes. She probably didn't plan for it.
Right. And we all have our personal reactions to this. It's just an automatic thing, I guess. But be honest, we tend to judge. Some is direct about it, the extroverts maybe, and some just think it to themselves, and some use it as an interesting thing to gossip about.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Hmm.
And maybe we do this based on our own experiences and what we would do ourselves in the same situation. I don't know.
Which we don't really know, anyways,
No,
until you're
we
in it.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, what's interesting is that my friend said, well, I think it's okay, and she deserved it, or that the ones around her accepted it because her husband wasn't a very good one. It wasn't a happy marriage.
Huh.
And I must say, this is an honest thought and reflection about it. And I totally don't judge her for saying this because me, before my own experience, I would have thought exactly the same, I guess.
Huh. I see. So then it's more acceptable. I mean, if you're, I wouldn't say a husband is bad, but if it was a bad marriage, is that what we're saying here?
Exactly. And now I was like, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be just as okay if they had a happy marriage? Or, I mean, why do we feel the need to justify it like that?
That is such a good point. Again, it's like we have this invisible grief timeline. And if you move on too soon, people question your love or the life that you had with,
Yeah.
your partner. And
Mm. Like I said, I've had those thoughts also, the whole really already. Didn't she or he love their spouses thing? I mean, for me, that would be way too soon. And yes, now I'm comparing and thinking about me. And I'm the first to admit that I totally judged that at first too in my head. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that out loud now. But that is just the way it is with most people, I think.
totally, it's so human, but also kind of harsh when we talk about it now. But I
Mm.
guess that's the way it is. I've judged before too, but talking about it like this really makes me want to never do it again.
Hmm. But this just made me realize how much we tend to judge each other in general, for sure, but also in grief when people are so vulnerable, even without meaning to, because we bring ourselves into their lives in a way, and that isn't very helpful or compassionate, I think.
No, it's not. Maybe that's why we're so judgy, because we do put our perspective into these situations and don't really think that we're all different. And we don't know everyone's story. And I will definitely have this, like I said, back of my mind before I will even let a thought be too judgy anymore.
Yeah, same. And I think these reflections can be really helpful for people, like you say. For me, this totally changed after experiencing it myself, but it's an important reminder for sure, for everyone.
Yeah. And you can think whatever you want, but be careful with your judgment and words. Two ears, one mouth.
Yes. And she also shared a story about another widow, favorite word. Anyways, she was older than us and she's been on her own for years after her husband passed. And then one day she got a visit from this guy she knows pretty well, and his wife had just passed away only 2 weeks or so earlier. And he came over to her and sort of gently suggested they could maybe spend some time together, like have coffee, and nothing dramatic, just companionship. And her reaction was very firm, just no. And I get it, honestly. My first thought was the same as hers. And my friend, like, wow, that's way too soon for him. I mean, how rude, just because she was a widow also. But then I started thinking maybe he wasn't trying to replace his wife or rush into something inappropriate. Maybe he was just incredibly lonely and reaching out to someone who might understand what he was going through. Maybe it came out at the wrong time in the wrong way, but still, it was a human moment. And
Yeah.
it just made us both reflect a bit on how we react to other people's grief and how quick we are to judge what's too soon or too much or not enough, even because it's different from ours in a way. Maybe that was our conclusion, anyways, because maybe it's not always that simple. And I must say, it's actually allowed for girls and boys to be just friends.
That is true. As long as, I don't know how it came out when he said it.
Yeah, of
At least it
course.
was a story for that lady to retell. She must have retold it. That's why we're talking
Yeah.
about it.
Hmm.
But another thing is that it seems to be pretty common, because I've heard a similar story. So when I asked you about it, then I thought it was another person, and that is almost like the exact same story.
It is.
And I wonder if men and women are different too. But
Maybe
in
it's a
that
gender
sense,
thing. I don't
yeah.
know.
But anyways,
Made
let's
me
skip that.
reflect.
Yeah. Um, but yeah. Anyways, these stories really says a lot, and it's so easy to react with a quick no, that's not right. But we rarely stop to think about what's behind it. Like you said, maybe he was just reaching out for some kind of connection. I mean, grief can make people act in ways that doesn't always make sense to others. And sometimes it's just about surviving the moment. It's messy, it's human. And can I say, with the story that I mentioned from that person I thought you were talking about, when she told me that her response was a no immediately, then I was like actually thinking, but why not?
Yeah, I
Isn't it
remember.
nice to have somebody to travel with, or let's go out to eat and hang out with? So I
Hmm.
think sometimes it's also because, oh no, because my family wouldn't want this, or I don't know what other people would say, or,
Exactly. Yeah.
sometimes that can stop it too.
Yeah, exactly. And now we shared so many stories, but let me tell you one that I feel like is completely within the topic of this episode. Because right after my husband's funeral, my best friend recommended we watch this show together on Netflix because she stayed with me for days after the funeral. So, anyways, the show was Afterlife with Ricky Gervais, and we both love him. He is so funny, even though I know he steps on some toes sometimes.
Yeah, he does.
So anyways, she was so sweet, taking care of me, and she had it set up so nicely with drinks and snacks and the whole thing, even though I didn't really eat and drink so much at the time. But, anyways, then about, I think, halfway through the first episode, she suddenly looked over at me with big eyes and just went, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is this awful? Am I rubbing it in? I wasn't thinking," and so on. And she felt terrible. And I remember I actually started laughing because I could see the desperation in her eyes, you know.
For her.
Yeah.
That awkward moment when you realize you might have made a huge mistake. Because
All
maybe,
right.
it says that it's about his wife passing away, right? So it's a
Yeah,
show
he's a
about that.
widower.
So maybe she thought it would be a good show for you to watch together,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
realizing everything he says.
It was maybe not the right moment to suggest this exact TV show, but the thing is, I actually loved it. Like, genuinely loved it. It's dark and sarcastic, but also really honest and funny. And it shows what can happen when someone gets completely stuck in grief, when they shut the world out and just live in that pain. And of course, that's exaggerated for the sake of the show, but it also felt weirdly, I don't know, comforting. Like, okay, this is one path it could take if I don't find a way forward.
Mhm.
And it didn't scare me, but it made me think. And sometimes that's what you need, I think. Something that cuts through the fog a little, even if it's a comedy with a grumpy old man and a dog.
Oh, you should have heard that you called him old.
Okay, I take it back with a grumpy man and a dog.
Totally. And honestly, shows like that can give us language for stuff we don't even know how to talk about. They can put words or feelings to things we haven't been able to name yet, maybe, even the uncomfortable stuff, especially the uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah, that show actually shows that grief, when you don't process it or when you hold on too tight, it can start shaping your whole identity. And suddenly you're not you anymore. You're just the person who lost someone, the bitter widower or widow. And that's when it can slowly become a burden, not just sadness, but something heavier, something that stops you from really living, like my friend's mom, for instance, also.
Yeah. It's like grief is supposed to be something we carry with us, not something that carries us away. And I guess that's the line we're trying to explore here. When does it stop being love, memory, connection, and start becoming something that limits you instead of supporting you?
Right. And it isn't always easy to spot because from the outside, it can look like you're just still remembering, still honoring, still feeling. But inside, you might know you're stuck. I don't know. When the pain becomes a comfort zone in itself, you don't want to let go of the grief because it feels like letting go of the person, also, maybe.
And that makes so much sense in a way, also. Because for some, it might be like, what else do you have left, right? The grief can feel like the last real connection. But if that connection starts to isolate you or stops you from creating new ones, that's when it might be time to ask if you're capable. Is it still helping me or is it holding me back? But this might be an impossible thing for some, though. I mean, the story you shared really shows that. And that TV show also.
True. Because it's not like you wake up one day and go, now my grief is unhealthy. I mean, it evolves over time, I guess. And it often takes someone close to gently point it out for you. And sometimes even that won't be enough, sadly.
Yeah. It's like grief has an expiration date, but only in other people's minds. And by other people, I mean those of us on the outside, not the ones who's actually grieving. Because for the person who lost someone, it doesn't just fade from your body, your nervous system, or your everyday routines. It stays, just in different ways.
That is true. And I read up and found that science backed this up too. I mean, of course it does. Grief isn't linear, it doesn't follow five neat stages in order and then disappear. Some people experience something called prolonged grief disorder, which is when grief becomes so persistent and impairing that it actually meets criteria for a diagnosis. It's rare, but it's real, and it shows how deep the pain can sit if it doesn't have room to move or change.
And isn't that more likely if you don't have support around you think? Or if the loss was traumatic or unexpected?
Yeah, all of that. The risk factors are usually about the relationship to the person lost, the suddenness of it, or whether you feel isolated in your grief. And I think this is where cultural differences come into, I guess. In Norway, we tend to be more private. We don't always talk openly about grief, and sometimes we keep it quiet, and the support can be subtle. There is a strong focus on coping and moving on, but I feel like it's also changing now, I must say. I feel like people are more open now than, let's say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, maybe. In
Mm.
the US where I live, I feel like it's almost the opposite in some ways. People might be more open emotionally, but there's also this cultural obsession with fixing things. Therapy, self-help, productivity, but then it's kind of like grief is a problem if you're expected to work through or solve it fast. I mean, these are my thoughts anyways.
Yeah, but that's kind of fascinating because neither culture is perfect. In Norway, I guess the silence can feel cold, and in the US, the pressure to bounce back might feel overwhelming. But at the same time, we are so deep into our own culture and traditions. Wherever you live in Norway, it's kind of taboo to visit a psychologist still, especially in smaller towns. I think in bigger cities, this is more accepted. I don't know. That is my experience, anyways. But I also think it's more common now than before. People are more open to it and speak about it.
Yeah, I think it's more common.
Mhm. But I think what really matters is creating a space, personally or with others, therapist or no, where grief can exist without shame or deadlines. And some might have to hide boundaries to see this. I don't know again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're saying there is so important because we really are shaped by the culture around us, I think, whether we notice it or not. Here in the US, it's totally normal to have a therapist. It's even expected in some circles. But that also comes with this subtle pressure to always be working on yourself or getting better, doing things the right way, you should say,
Mm.
or you could say. And in Norway, yeah, maybe the silence can feel more respectful. I don't know if respectful is the right word, but also more isolating for sure, especially if you're someone who needs to talk or get out your emotions. It's tricky, right?
Mm. Definitely.
Because, yeah, because grief doesn't follow rules or timelines, and it definitely doesn't care about cultural norms. So I think you're right. What we need isn't a specific method or setting, but that safe space where you can actually feel what you're feeling without guilt or shame or some kind of invisible stopwatch ticking in the background. And without assumptions, like we said earlier, some people visit the grave every day, some never go, some keep their loved ones' belongings untouched for years and years, and others give it away immediately. And neither means that you loved more or less.
Exactly. It's the inner work, not the outer rituals, that shape how you grieve. But even the rituals, we can't underestimate how powerful they are or how lost you can feel without them. And that's another big factor, the support system, the people around you, whether you're allowed to grieve your way.
So if someone's grief is really deep, really long lasting, how do we know when it's time to worry or to step in and offer help, you think?
That is such a delicate question because grief is, supposed to hurt. It's not something you get over. You carry it with you, and we are all so different again. But if someone seems stuck in a way that keeps them from living at all, like they stopped functioning, stopped connecting, or lost all sense of meaning or joy, that's when it might be time to gently check in, I guess.
And gently is probably the key. Maybe it's, when people stop saying or start saying no to things that they usually would say yes to.
Yeah.
And also, when I said gently, it's because the last thing someone in pain needs is to feel judged or like they're grieving the wrong way. It really has to come from care and not correction.
Yeah. And even though it can feel awkward, just asking open, loving questions can mean so much. Like, how are you really doing these days? Or what's been hardest lately? Or even, is there something you wish people understood better about what you're going through? And the most important part, be present when they answer and just listen.
And sometimes just showing up is enough too, maybe. Not fixing, not advising, just being there, holding space as we keep repeating.
Mm. Yeah, presence is powerful. And if you're the one grieving, if you notice that you're withdrawn completely, that life feels meaningless, that you're numb, or that nothing brings any light anymore, it might be time to talk to someone, to seek help if you can. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you deserve support.
And support can look different depending on where you live, of course. In Norway, I think your doctor is often the first step. They can refer you to a grief group or a psychologist, but you do need to ask. It's not always something that's automatically offered.
No, it isn't. Especially in smaller communities or older generation, there is still a bit of taboo around mental health, especially when it comes to prolonged grief. Whereas in the US, like you said earlier, it might be more culturally accepted to seek help, but not always accessible or affordable, which is its own barrier.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes people don't even know what they need. They just know that they're not okay. And that's enough reason to reach out.
Yeah. And like I said before, psychologists now recognize the prolonged grief disorder when someone's grief remains intense and debilitating for more than a year. It's not about pathologizing grief, like make it into a disease that you can be fixed from. It's about recognizing when it's taken over someone's life in a way that keeps them stuck. There are evidence based treatments like grief focused therapy, meaning centered approaches, or even certain medications when depression is a part of the picture.
So, support isn't about rushing someone through grief, it's about helping them move with it towards life, towards connection, towards something meaningful again.
Yeah, and I think we all need to talk more about this, not just in therapy rooms, but at kitchen tables, on long walks, in friendships, and yes, in spaces like this.
Because grief is a part of being human, and learning to live with it doesn't mean you've stopped loving, it means you've chosen to keep living.
Beautifully said. And if you're listening right now, whether you're grieving or loving someone who is, please know your care matters, your presence matters, and help is out there. There is no shame in needing it.
This is a heavy topic, I must say, because grief is natural. We all know that. But sometimes it just doesn't loosen its grip. And when it starts taking over a person's life, that's when things get complicated.
Definitely. And to wrap this all up here, I think it's important to say again there's no normal timeline for grief. But I think we can conclude that there is a difference between carrying your grief and being consumed by it.
Right. Like when it starts affecting your relationships, your work, your health, your family, those around you, or when everything joyful seems like betrayal, like how can I smile when they're gone? Then it becomes a burden, really.
Yeah, there's guilt and fear, and sometimes a strange loyalty to pain also. Like, if I start to feel better, does that mean I've stopped loving them? And why do we have these feelings and thoughts? Is it about ourselves, prior experiences, respect for the one we're lost, or other people's opinion? Or a bit of all that combined, maybe?
Yeah. But I've come to realize that it's more common than we think to have these thoughts, especially if you're surrounded by silence or people who don't know how to support you or that you aren't available for help, any kind of help. It can become this echo chamber, maybe for some, hard to get out of.
Yeah, and for some, when you're kind of stuck in grief, it can start blending with depression, like real clinical depression or anxiety. Some stop sleeping, stop eating, stop showing up, and it's not just being sad, it's something heavier, something deeper. And that's when it's time to ask for help, I have to say. But easier said than done.
Yeah, because you can't always climb out of that hole alone. Sometimes we do need the professionals. And also, if you don't have like family around you, having professionals or other people, like groups that has been going through the same thing, can be better help. It's because they have experienced the same, even though all experiences are different.
Sure.
But I think some people resist help because they think they're supposed to grieve forever, maybe. Like the deeper pain, the more real the love was. I don't know.
Yeah. But healing isn't betrayal, not at all. And it also isn't forgetting. You can carry someone with you and move forward. Those two things are not opposites.
That's what we keep coming back to in this podcast, I think. That grief changes shape. It's not something you get over, it's something you have to integrate in your life while you move forward. But if you get stuck in the rawness, that's not integration, that's suffering.
And suffering isn't sacred. It's okay to want joy again, to seek meaning. I think sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, I don't want to live in this pain anymore. But it isn't always easy, for sure. And some might have a harder time getting to that turning point, if ever.
And maybe even ask, what would the person I lost want for me? Most of the time, the answer is not this. Not for you to wither and not choose life and happiness for yourself.
That is such a good point, and I guess most of us know this. I mean, I've sometimes felt like I was bragging to others in grief when I told my story about all the things me and my husband actually talked about, because that was a true gift for me after he died.
Yeah.
I didn't have to dwell on that, really. Of course, I did at times, but others don't get to have these conversations, and I can imagine that being hard. I think that my friend's mom got so stuck in her grief that she never gave herself permission to live again. She was just surviving, and that had a deep affection on the people around her. I mean, whole families can be destroyed by this.
That is just so sad. But I totally get what you mean. Your husband gave you this incredible gift, the list.
He truly did. But every story is unique, and if we lose someone we love, we usually know that they loved us and wanted us to have a good life, right?
For sure. Good point.
And I mean, sometimes it takes a good therapist, a safe friend, or just a wake up call to start finding your way back. It's always a way out, but you have to take that step forward.
So maybe the question isn't how long should grief last or how long does it last, but rather, is my grief still serving me or is it starting to hurt me?
That is the turning point, I think. Grief can shape us, remind us of what mattered. But if it starts holding us back, keeping us from living, from loving, from feeling joy, then maybe it's time to ask gently, what do I need now? Not to forget, but to move forward.
And there's always a way forward. It might take time, it might feel impossible at first, but it's there. A different path for everyone.
So if you're listening and any of this resonates, please know that you're not broken. You're just human, and grief is hard, really hard. It's okay to still be carrying pain, and it's also okay to want to feel light again, to reach for life even with a little darkness still in your life.
And sadly, for some people, even with all the love and support in the world, that shift doesn't happen. But I do want to say, I know your friend truly did everything she could for her mother. And sometimes that just has to be enough. We can't save everyone, but we can take care of ourselves and we can live fully in honor of the ones who couldn't.
Yes. We carry them with us, not as a weight, but as a part of who we are. And we'd really love to hear from you, our listeners. Has grief felt like a burden to you? And have you found new ways to carry it?
We love to hear your stories, your reflections.
Thanks for being here with us. We're so glad you're listening.
Take care of your hearts and of each other. Bye bye.
Bye.
Nina had a dream, all black and white. We were talking in English, yeah, that ain't right. Two Norwegian sisters miles apart, but that dream lit a fire, put a mic to the heart. Katrine's in the States, Nina's back home. Two voices, one mission through the microphone. Grief and life, the highs and the lows. We hit record, uh-oh, where the file go? Oh, we fumble, we stumble, but baby we shine. Lost the intro, never mind. Wi-Fi shaky, cables crossed, but our hearts stay strong, no moment lost. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sip, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. Grief walks in, pulls up a chair, says I'll stay a while, yeah, life ain't fair. But we mix it with laughter, a toast in hand, finding light where the dark still stands. Ba-da-da-boo-doo, is this thing on? Mic's on mute, oh well, move along. Ba-ba-dee, ba-ba-da, take two. Oops, too late, let's laugh it through. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sip, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. So plug in, lean in, let's take our time. No script, no filters, just rhythm and rhyme. We're here, we're now, we're in our prime. Two sisters, one dream, on the mic.